Welcome to Supercharge student engagement through the 5E model. It is actually not just for science, contrary to popular belief. Also, welcome to our office hour webinars. If you've not attended one of these before, get ready. It's a fast and furious 30-minute professional development webinar that you're going to wonder where all the time just went. I do every time. Also, grab your smart devices, as you'll have some QR codes and links that you can use. If you do not have a smart device with you or you're distracting somebody with it, you will also have links in the chat box that you can utilize. So find that chat box if you haven't already and just drop a quick hello and where you're from and if there's anything exciting that you're going to have in your summer so far. We like to learn with and from each other, so participation makes it a lot more fun for everybody. Are you guys ready? All right, here we go. So first, we're going to start off with a true or false question about the 5E model. So you can either scan the QR code or I'm going to drop a link in the chat box. And it is going to take us to a Mentimeter. And if you give me a second, I'm really terrible at posting links in the chat and talking at the same time. Not one of my strengths. All right. If neither of these tools work, feel free to just post in the chat box what your answers are. So within Mentimeter, you're going to answer 3 true or false questions about the 5E model. You'll either select true or false and then click submit. So our first question is, the 5E learning model can only be used for science courses, and I kind of gave you a freebie on that one. So we have 7 or 8 falses, which is true. The 5E model was originally intended for those STEM science classes, but it is actually fantastic to use in our other areas. Our second question is, the 5E learning model was originally created to increase student engagement. So true or false? Go with your gut if you don't know. The 5E learning model was originally created to increase student engagement. So we've got 7 truths. So this one is actually false, and I don't want to spill the beans on my later stuff and give spoilers. Like how you waited for that one, the false there. So really quick, it actually was not created for student engagement. That is one of the things that it does. It was created to help connect prior knowledge to what they're going to be taught. And then our third question and last question is, all of the parts of the 5E learning model have to be used in every lesson. So all parts of the 5E learning model have to be used in every lesson. So we have 7 falses, 8 falses, and that's correct. This is false. You don't actually have to use all 5 in the lesson, and I'm going to spend a lot more time on this here in a little bit, so I don't want to give spoilers. All right, so what is the 5E learning model? So the 5E learning model is an inquiry-based learning model, and what that means is students learn by discovering. You give them an opportunity to discover, and then they learn through that. That's inquiry-based model, or sometimes you'll hear cycle because it's a circle. And that encourages students to connect their ideas and concepts or experiences as they apply it to their new learning and in new situations. This helps them make those really awesome connections between what they already know and their experiences and what you're teaching them, and be able to apply it in those new situations, which helps them get that deep and meaningful understanding that we so look for as educators. And it also helps students to stay engaged, because instead of rote memorization or you talking at them, they get to actually do something. All right, so now that we have some information, my name is Meredith Llewellyn. I'm the Instructional Design Specialist here at Goodheart-Willcox Publisher. Just for some information, if you've never attended one of these, I was a classroom teacher for 14 years. I've done training, I've done PD presenting, and now I'm an instructional designer. I taught science for most of my career, so 5E is really close and dear to my heart. So I'm really excited about today's PD in particular, because this is where my jam is. All right, so our goals today, because we want to keep our engagement high. And we know that when students and people are engaged in their learning and we give them the rationale behind their learning, they get more out of it. Our goals today are, you will explore the 5 phases of the 5E learning cycle. You'll discover practical strategies to apply the 5E model, and you'll develop a plan so you can seamlessly integrate it into your current teaching practice. All right, so we're going to do a quick strategy called a word cloud. You're going to scan the QR code, or I'm going to post the link in my chat box. And if you give me a hot minute, because this is not one of my strengths, as I already stated, talking and putting links in the chat box. It'll take you to another Mentimeter, except this one is a word cloud. And you're going to answer the question, how do you currently, in your current teaching practice, help students connect new ideas and prior knowledge or prior experiences? So how do you currently do that? Do you have a current method? Do you have something you like? Do you have anything? So this could be, and I don't have anything. This could be, I utilize this method. This could be, this is my go-to strategy. So however you want to answer this question, but how do you currently connect student prior knowledge or prior experiences to those new ideas you're teaching? So you can type as many words as you want to. And a word cloud, if you don't know, the more times a word appears or a phrase appears, the larger it gets. And then if it doesn't appear that often, it stays smaller. And like I stated before, if the link's not working or you're just not comfortable with this or you don't have your phone, you're more than welcome to type in the chat box. So if the chat box is more comfortable for you, find that chat box and you can drop it in there too. All right, so currently we connect new ideas to prior knowledge in our students with stories, questioning, asking about experiences, I'm assuming is what experience means, equating them to different situations. Those are all fantastic. Making it relatable, fantastic. Yeah, we want to make sure that the students have material that's relatable to them. Otherwise, they'll phase out pretty quickly. So all of these are great ways to keep our students engaged and entertained. So how do you currently connect student new idea and prior knowledge? So we have stories, questionings, experience, relatability, equating them. Those are all fantastic. To be cognizant of your time, I'm going to move on. Not that you guys don't have more wonderful ideas. So when do you use the 5E model? So the 5E model is meant to take place over approximately 1 unit, not 1 lesson, although it can happen over a couple lessons, not necessarily a unit, it's just roughly a unit. So a longer period of time. So also, you don't have to use the 5E model linearly. It is not a first you do this step, then you do this step. It works the best that way, but you may need to go backwards or forwards or loop it. So keep in mind that this is a progression, right? It can go in multiple different ways. So the 5 E's are engage, explore, explain, elaborate. And if you've dealt with this before, they've changed it from extend to elaborate. So you may have seen extend, and then evaluate. So in the first phase, you obviously engage your learners. This is where you excite them, you make connections, and then the learner's job, they're focusing on a phenomena or a problem or question or something that you're giving them to focus on. And you as the teacher assign the task that they're going to look into to get that prior knowledge and prior experiences and figure out where you're at. Then you're going to explore. So this is where you generate that curiosity. You focus on that inquiry-based learning. And this is where students really thrive. They get really excited. So the learners are going to investigate that question, phenomena, whatever you gave them, and you're going to simply facilitate. So you're there to make sure they're guided in the correct direction. From explore, you get to explain. This is where you present the new knowledge that they're going to need to make connections to. The learner's job is to listen, discuss, participate, and make those new connections. And your job as the educator is to introduce the new concepts and share that information. Then we get to our elaborate or formally extend. So this is our phase that allows those learners to dig deeper. So this is where learners make those deep and meaningful connections that we so want them to get as educators between new information and their prior knowledge or experiences. And this will be done typically through critiquing or designing or questioning or probing into different areas in new situations. So they'll take what they just learned and their prior experiences and they'll apply it to a new situation. Your job as the educator is to encourage students to apply that new knowledge to new situations and give them the opportunity to do that. So once again, you're kind of facilitating, you're guiding. And then lastly, we evaluate them. So this is where you assess and give feedback. And this can be a continuum of assessments, right? You may be at the formative assessment stage. You might be at a quiz stage, an assessment stage. This might be formal assessments, informal assessments, or it might be as far as presentations and projects. So this is where you kind of go in that it doesn't necessarily have to go perfectly linearly. This is where you may need to jump back and forth between different parts. And this is where you as the educator, you have all your experience and knowledge of what you need to do and what your students need. So we're going to, after I just jabbered at you for a really long time, we're going to take a strategy called triangle, circle, square. And you're going to write 3 points, like a triangle, that stuck with you. Anything that squares with your head, with your thinking, you agree with it. And anything still circling in your head, so those are your questions. So based on what I just talked to you about, you're going to answer 3 points that stuck with you. And I'm going to present it here and put the link in the chat box. Anything that's stuck with you, anything that squares with your thinking that you agree to, and anything that is still circling in your head in terms of questions. So you can scan that QR code, or you can use the link that I just posted in the chat box. Or if neither of those are your jams or they're not working, that's fine. You're more than welcome to put your answers in the chat box directly. So based on the 5 E's we just talked about, the engagement, the explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. So those 5 stages, what are 3 things that you learned, stuck with you? Maybe you already knew and they just popped out of the hidden shelves, dusted off in your brain. Anything that squares with your thinking and anything still circling in your head. With your using your mobile device, you may need to scan left and right, and just because Padlet will take you to an area that needs to move left and right. Once you have your answers, you'll just click submit. And if you want to put, all 3 in one, that's fine, or you can do 3 separate, however works for you. Just a quick reminder, if you like Mentimeter or you like Padlet, they're great interactive free tools for educators that help collaborate within the classroom. But you will need to probably check with your IT department just to make sure that you and your students can actually utilize it and there's no firewall blockings or anything else that can happen with that. So I'm going to take a quick break from talking and let you guys think and type. So the 5 E's that we just talked about. So we had engagement, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. So 3 things that stuck with you, anything that squares with your thinking, and anything still circling in your head. And remember, if the link's not working for you or the QR code isn't working for you, feel free to just type it in the chat box. That is also perfectly fine and acceptable. So the hardest thing as a teacher is that wait time. I always struggled with that as a teacher. It feels like forever. If you guys need any like tips or anything that's really you're struggling to grasp. So when I learned about the 5E first, some of the things that really stuck with me were that it wasn't just for engagement. Like in my head, that's what I always thought it was for. And that it had a lot of different versatility with it, that it didn't necessarily have to go in order, that you could bounce around within it. I don't know if that helps anybody jog their memories. So I'm going to give us about 1 more minute to type. And then if we haven't got anything, all right. So we've got, okay, some points that stuck with us were explore, elaborate, and evaluate. We already did 5E, but we didn't state it in those terms. Yeah, that's a lot of times how it goes. Connect learning to prior knowledge, facilitating to guide the learner in the process versus just telling them. It's amazing how much that helps our engagement as people. Engaging is so important to keep student attention. Being able to explain theory in multiple different ways from viewpoints is super valuable. And how do you know if you're effective unless you evaluate? That is a great question. I don't have an answer to that. So how to keep students engaged by using the ones that apply to the group of students. Yep. All right, so anything that squares with your thinking, we had evaluate. It's similar to the TGFU model for PE. Students must have some kind of desire to learn the specific information for them to be truly engaged. That's 100% accurate. Formative assessment is important before evaluating. Yeah, you have to know where the students are and what they're engaged in and what they like. So anything still circling in your head? How do you engage students? That's a great question. What about excessive absenteeism, to use the 5Es? That's a great question. So I will address that at the end in case anything gets brought up in the middle, but I'll get back to that question. And if I don't, remind me. Usually your whole class will not be ready to elaborate or extend at the same time. Exactly. Some will have learned the information while others did not. That differentiation point is definitely key. And then I'm going to leave this questions up so that I remember to go back to them about absenteeism, because that's a great question. All right, so a 5E lesson template is pretty much like your normal lesson plan template. You're going to have your topic, your standards. Hopefully you have an essential question that you go back to for the year or the unit, your learning outcomes, and then it's a good idea to have materials. At first when I started teaching, didn't throw those in, and then realized when I went back the next year, I'd forget things, or, oh yeah, I needed 5 dry erase markers, or I should have laminated these. So those are just handy notes for you to have as the educator, or if your sub's there, or someone else needs to do the lesson for you. I always put in a summary just so I would remember what this lesson was even about. And then you get to your engage. How are you going to actually engage your student? How are you going to explain? What are you going to explain to them? How are you going to have them explore the situation? How are you going to elaborate? And like our friend brought up earlier, what are you going to do for those differentiations when you need different levels of elaboration? And what if they need to go back? And how do you do your small groups in those situations or different stations? And then your evaluation piece, what are your formative assessments going to look like? How are you going to end the unit? Do you have any benchmarks or formal assessments you need to give? Are you going to give quizzes for data along the way? What feedback points are you going to have for your students? And then your resources. Do you have any YouTube links or videos you show, or presentations you want to give, or questions you want to ask? Or if the students are doing a project-based learning situation, do you have any resources to help them? So if a student comes up and says, man, I am really stuck, I don't have anything, do you have any resources pulled for that? So that would be your kind of template. I wanted to show you this, so I'm going to have to share my screen, but there is a 5E lessons that you can kind of look at. I'm going to put the link in the chat box on a site called K20 Learn. It's presented by researchers at the Oklahoma State University. So they have different kinds of lessons. You can kind of get a vibe for how a 5E lesson should look if you haven't seen one before. And they have a whole slew of different lessons that you can scroll through, click on, download. So this is just kind of they may not be up your alley, they may not be at your grade level, but you can search them, you can filter them, just so you get kind of an idea of where you need to be and where you're at. All right, and then give me 1 second. I have to get back to my presentation. Okay. So, always takes a minute. Bear with me. It's hard to switch screens. All right, so some strategies that I told you we would learn, some practical strategies to utilize your 5E learning with. So I broke them down into the 5Es and then gave a couple of strategies per area. So we will do an activity with this at the end. So pay attention to ones that you may have already used or ones that you're currently interested in, because that's what we're going to utilize after this. So for engagement, some strategies are you can do a bell ringer. So bell ringer is just you show a question, a picture, a puzzle. If you do music stuff, you can play a music clip. You can show a tool. You can show part of their project just to get them thinking about your class and involved. You can do what's called a KWHL chart. They've elaborated from the KWL charts of many decades ago when I started teaching. And that stands for know. What do they already know? Wonder, any wonders they have, questions they have, curiosities. How are they going to get there? How do they know? And then at the end, after leaving that up for your unit, you'll go back to it, revisit it, and talk about what they actually learned. Did they answer all their wonders? Did they connect any prior knowledge points? And then we have QQT, which stands for quiz, quiz, trade. It takes a little bit more time setting up, but kids really enjoy it. It gets them up, it gets them moving. So you have questions where they quiz. So I would quiz you, you would quiz me, and then we would trade our cards. So this could be vocab definition. This could be tools. This could be music. This could be PE movements, rules of a game, whole bunch of different things. And lastly, in this phase, another good one is a phenomena. This is pretty common in science and STEM areas, but I've seen a lot of my ELA friends and social studies teachers starting to use it. So basically with the phenomena, you start off by showing them, it could be a picture, it could be a puzzle. So I did this a lot in my symbiotic unit when I taught science. I would show a picture of a shark and a remora to one class, or the alligator and the bird to another class, and that's all I would show them. And then I would tell them, today you're going to come up with questions, you're going to research what this picture is, and then you're going to make a poster about what our new lesson is going to be over. And they would have to figure out what the next topic is. And there's a lot of frustration points at the beginning. They would have a lot of, how am I going to do this? This is so frustrating, right? But by the end, they would really like it and they were super invested in it. Then we get to explore. So there's a strategy called I have, who has. This is similar to quiz, quiz, trade. So I have a screwdriver who has a screw. I have the quarter note who has, 2 whatever, 4/8 notes. Then you have something called pass the problem. So this is where pairs can, you typically are pairs, but you can do groups, respond to a problem when completing a solution. So when time's up, they exchange their problem, share the work they've done with another pair of students, and then that pair continues to work and revise on the problem. And then you continue to revise the problem until you've gone through a couple different pairs and they share with the class. So this helps students get started, revise situations, work on problems, brainstorming, but doing it in a way that gets them up and moving and around. And then we have what we call a walk and talk, which is exactly what it sounds like. You give them something to talk about and they walk while they talk. And then we have our explain. This is where you have a gist. So you give the gist of what they learned about, what are they doing and why. This is a fantastic question to ask them at any given point. And then you have a 2-frame reflection. So in the 2-frame reflection, you have students that will fold a paper in half, like hamburger style. Then they draw a like neutral face, so that straight line face. They open and fold, draw another face to express how they feel about it. And then they can do a whole bunch of things from that with that you decide to do. Then we're going to have our elaborate stage with agreement circles. So they say whether they agree or disagree. Then they indicate their opinions by drawing on an agreement circle in the appropriate area. They debate their stance, and then they can go switch circles as they need to. You can do a Socratic seminar, which is very similar to an agreement circle, but involves a lot more setup and debate. And if you're interested in those, I don't want to take the time, so that could be a whole webinar in and of itself. And then you have a gallery walk where students have the work hung up that they've been working on, and students go around and leave feedback. And it encourages participation. You can take it a step further and let students give feedback and then change it. And then evaluation, this is where you have your projects, presentations, formal assessments, formative assessments, however you're going to, whatever stage you're at in the evaluation stage. So the strategy list that I would like you guys to do, and we don't have a lot of time left, so I want to be really cognizant. Instead of clicking on the QR code, if you could just put in the chat box anything that you've used and you've really liked, or if there was something that you want to try using. So just in the chat box, if there was a strategy that you just resonated with, you're like, I've used that, it's awesome, throw that in the chat box. Or if there's one that you're like, man, that would be really cool to try, throw that in the chat box too. So I'm going to give you a minute to type, because I want to be aware of your time. So for about a minute, write down in the chat box anything that you liked that we just talked about that you've used, or anything you want to try. All right, so we have the group activity with the presentation by the student spokesperson. I use Pass the Problem in my capstone class. That's awesome. Triangle, square, circle, that's a great one. I mean, it gets people thinking a lot, and then they get a shape that they can associate with it. So our visual brains like holding on to that. That's awesome. I'm going to give just a little bit longer in case you're in the middle of typing and hitting enter. I don't want to ruin anything for you. All right. So before I move on, I see someone typing in the chat box. So are there any you liked or you want to try using? Okay. So today we're going to recap. I know it's almost time to go. It flies by so fast every single time. It's a good idea to help your students and people that you're working with recap and connect everything they've done with that day by just going over it at the end. So we explored the 5 phases of the 5E learning cycle. We discovered practical strategies to apply that 5E model. And then hopefully that's giving you a chance to kind of develop a plan for your own practice. We used the technology Mentimeter and Padlet. And then we talked about a lot of different strategies that you could use with this, but we also practiced true and false, word cloud, and triangle, circle, square. A couple reminders at GW, we absolutely love feedback. I utilize it and I read through all of the feedback from all of the areas. So please, if you don't mind taking the time, it was really helpful for me and our company to fill out this, I think it's 6 questions evaluation form, just giving feedback about today's webinar, any topics that you would be interested in, how we can improve. I promise I do look through all of this data. and make any changes to any upcoming webinars that we have. While you do that, I'm going to put the link for today's attendance in the chat box. So this should open up a certificate for attending today's webinar. And then as a quick reminder, we are going to send you a recording of this within 24 hours to the email that you use to register for this event with. And then don't worry, I know I'm going to go forward, but the link is still there. So if you still need the professional development feedback, that would be great if you could fill it out. The link is and QR code is still here. I'm going to put the link in the chat box if that works better for you. No, sorry, this is not my strong suit. All right, so here's a link to the feedback form. If you're interested in our next webinar on June 11th, it's called Closing the Learning Chasm, Dynamic Strategies for Bridging the Generational Divides. You can use the QR code or the link that I'm going to put in the chat box to sign up now, or we will do a quick reminder email for another sign up chance to the email that you use to register for this with. So I know I just put a lot of links in the chat box. There's one for your certificate today. There's one for a quick evaluation form. And then lastly, there's another registration event sign up if you're interested in attending next week, same time, same place, on Closing the Learning Chasm, Dynamic Strategies for Bridging the Generational Divide. Thank you so much for attending today. I love these webinars. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. So thank you for all your participation and hard work. It's so great to learn with and from you guys. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. My name is Meredith Llewellyn, and I'm the Instructional Design Specialist here at GW. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at future webinars. So have a great one.